In college, I had a professor who said that we should take pleasure in what we do. His name was Dr. Davis. I was doing this long before his reminder with writing, though. I've always enjoyed creating. That's how I see all writing, even literary analysis, which I feel like sometimes doesn't seem like it's a creative endeavor. I see it that way, and I always sought to have my own stamp or my own voice in my writing. And I've tried to carry that into my classroom. All my students come to me with their own thoughts and ideas about the world. They're individuals, not empty vessels. And as a teacher in a democratic society, I try to kind of combine all those things into the idea that I want to help students have their own voice. This is something we really value as Americans, individualism and having your own voice and being able to participate as your own person in our democratic society. And so the things I really focus on in my classes are creativity and freedom. Looking back at my own experiences, one of the first one that stuck out in my mind was 6th grade, Mrs. Logan, and the poetry book she assigned. We were assigned this poetry book. We learned about all these different formats and then had all the free reign as long as we used the different formats to come up with poems. And I think what I learned from this looking back is that creativity breeds excellence, not without structure though. I know I wouldn't have created the products I did without the guidance from Mrs. Logan and the structure. However, if I had been assigned topics, I know I never would have come up with the creative ideas I did. I know one of them was about a crazy backwards school, probably kind of inspired by the Wayside School books. The next instance I think of as I reflect on my own writing experience is 7th grade, the first time I had real freedom, real and true freedom to write what I wanted. The teacher had said we could swear. That's right, we could use swear words in our writing. And it was for specifically a letter that was written from a character's perspective, Brian from That Was Then, This Is Now, who swore in the book. And so to be able to write with his voice, we needed that freedom to use those words. And for the most part, I think my class did really well with it, with a few exceptions. One of my friends, Greg, wrote a ridiculous letter full of F-bombs. But other than that, most students won't abuse freedom, and those that do can be dealt with. So I think giving them that freedom is important. The next thing, I jump ahead to my senior year, senior literature and the big final research paper. I worked really hard, was really interested. I know it had some Ray Bradbury tie-ins. I love science fiction, and I thought I'd done a really nice job, handed it in, didn't do as well as I had hoped. No chance to revise either. And I think looking back, the biggest problem I had were the strict parameters and my tendency to want to add my own voice. So really this is kind of a struggle where I wanted to have my own voice within this paper, but no one was kind of allowing me to do that. And so I think what I kind of learned from this, looking back, is that a creative mind, when it meets a stifling structure, is not going to do very well overall because it's going to tend to lean one way or the other too much, and the paper is either going to have no voice or too much of a voice and not enough structure. And so trying to find a balance between those two things in my own classroom is something I really strive for in terms of giving students parameters, but making it a discussion and having them understand that there is flexibility built in there, and that if they have ideas, I'm willing to talk about it and let them try different things. Another thing, jumping ahead to my college experience, was sometimes we need to hear blunt truths, even if they are not good. They can be phrased in a nice way, however. I remember I took a community college class my senior year in high school, and it was the first C I had ever gotten on a paper. I was pretty frustrated with that as I had excelled in my literature class the previous semester. I remember the paper was about Karl Marx and the Communist Manifesto. And overall, the professor shredded it, called it repetitive, and I think, I was kind of shaken by that as someone who'd always done well with English. And so I think, though, what I took from that, and I did take something good away, was the idea that I needed to step my game up. I think at that point, I was probably coming off of these classes where I'd had such strict structure. I was trying to follow that, and it did become repetitive. I was probably using the 5-paragraph theme essay, and he wanted something better than that. And so he didn't necessarily phrase it the best way, but I really took that to, be a challenge to myself, to push myself to the next level. And so again, that blunt feedback is necessary sometimes. And that's kind of my grammar connection in all of this, I think, is that you got to point it out. I think, maybe you pick your battles in terms of what assignments to really focus on for grammar, or what grammar skills in particular you're looking for. Maybe it's based on what you've been studying in class. But I do think you've got to point it out, because otherwise they're never going to realize that it's not right. Or they will when it's too late and they write their papers in college and get them torn apart like I did. So I think, I try to show them that it's in the long run that I'm thinking when we work on grammar and their future careers and their future college classes. I show them this, we talk about it, and then we proofread. I have just one more experience from my college experience, which I think the big lesson I learned from this was about freedom of interpretation, which is really a higher level thing for me. And maybe also the positive feedback, I think, stays with us. I had a professor, Dr. Husband, who was one of my favorite and most respected professors in college. And I remember working on her final for, I believe it was American literature, and spending hours just sweating in the computer lab. It was not air conditioned, and it was in a pretty warm May. But I worked really hard on it, thought I did a pretty good job, and when I went to conference with her, she gave me really positive feedback, and in fact said I was the first person that she could remember to ever get 100% on her written final. And so I was just really, that's always stayed with me, that she was so pleased with what I had done. And I think, again, looking back, I was really pleased, not only because I had thought I'd done a good job for myself, but I had given my audience exactly what she had wanted. And I think a big part of that came from my freedom to interpret. I think I had some really creative ideas. It was a paper about kind of several of the works we had read during the semester that had to do with like feminist studies. And so I think just my freedom to interpret kind of took me places that maybe she didn't expect and maybe I didn't expect. And as a result, I did really well for her. So I think those are kind of the big lessons I learned from my own writing experiences. I look at myself as a writer today. I don't necessarily always think of myself as a writer, but I'm actually currently taking the Graduate Writers Workshop through BGSU, and I'm really excited about it. I just heard my first story the other day, in fact. As I said before, creativity has always come easy to me. It's the structure I struggle with, and so I think I really try to focus on that part for students. Allow them the creativity and help them with the structure, help them with learning the different genres and building on kind of the skills they already have. And that's kind of how I approach things. I remember a story about E.B. White writing for deadlines and explaining that he never felt something was done or the best he was capable of, but at some point he had to send it out. Revision can't last forever. I don't know if I'm quite that bad, but again, when I look at myself as a writer, I definitely see that I struggle to submit final copies. The word final is foreboding, I think. However, most of my students don't seem to think this way, so that's one of the things I really work with them on, is not only the freedom and creativity of creating, but the freedom and creativity of revising, which I think is not always talked about, because sometimes that's when some of our best ideas come out. It's why I give them chances to rewrite. It's why we spend time to revise in class. I guess I'm already into my teaching, so I should back up for just a moment. When I came to teaching, I'd always thought that analysis was my strength as an English major, and I still believe it is personally, and yet it was interesting that my strength as a teacher became writing. I've taken my coaching experience and applied it to writing. We're on the same team, we have the same objectives. I will give constant feedback during the process in hopes of us accomplishing our goal. I want my students to see me as someone who holds them to high expectations, it also is a resource. I literally refer to myself as a resource in my classes and say, use me. That is why I give you time to write in class, so you can use me. I can help you build this assignment into the best version you are capable of, since I came up with the assignment. I am a proofreader, co-writer, questioner, brainstorm specialist. I can be whatever you need me to be. I've even compared myself to the room of requirement before. That's one of my favorite analogies. My first year teaching, so kind of backing up again, I had a brilliant student named Sam. He was a National Merit Scholar who really gave me a lot of trouble my first semester. He pushed me, he challenged me at every chance he got, and I was really frustrated with it. And then I kind of realized the big thing he needed was more freedom. And so kind of coming back to the idea of freedom, not only for myself, but my students need that too. And that was kind of one of the first times I realized that, I think, or I saw it in action. As soon as I gave Sam freedom within an assignment, as long as he was willing to discuss what he wanted to try with me, all of a sudden he was writing things that were beyond anything I would have imagined a high school student capable of. He wrote a modernist version of a narrative, which was just amazing. And eventually, actually, he even became my service student. So we went from this like really butting heads in the beginning relationship to getting along great. The thing maybe most important looking back now that I learned from Sam, though, is the need to push myself as a teacher, because I will rarely have a Sam in class to do so. Jumping ahead another year or two, I realized that I also need to kind of constantly be willing to adapt. I thought I had figured it out by my third year, and yet that's when I realized I've got to be flexible and constantly changing. I tried to assign a new paper, which was good for me trying to be flexible, and yet with this new assignment, I had stifled their creativity to respond and freedom to discuss. It was an article response. I had picked the article out. We'd kind of gone through it together very lightly, meaning that I wanted them to do most of the analysis, most of the figuring things out, and I didn't even really want them to discuss very much. And what I realized when I started reading the papers was that I had assigned the Karl Marx paper that I had hated so much. I didn't use the Communist Manifesto, but it was that rigid summary paper that my professor had assigned, and I had to take a step back and go, whoa, I need to do more modeling, I need to do more coaching as we go, I need to give them back the freedom to respond as they see fit, and kind of take my own ideas out of it to some extent. And once I made those revisions, I think the paper turned into something that students not necessarily enjoyed, but really learned a lot from. Now, moving ahead, I guess, even further to my most recent job is where I've learned maybe more than I did in my first 4 years of teaching. I went from a small private school to a large public school, where at the private school, my biggest class was 22 students, and at this public school, my smallest class this last year was 28. And so I had a lot to learn. One of the big things was the importance of modeling and exemplars. And at the same time, once I figured that out, I need to make sure that I don't make these the standard. I don't make these cages that students think they have to stay in, because I made both of those mistakes here. I didn't have enough models and exemplars in the beginning. I started having more of them. Then their papers turn into these cookie cutter, terrible to read 135 of experiences. And so I have diverse students. I needed to kind of bring that diversity out in their own writing. And so, making sure that they have a model to work from, but also making sure that that they know that I want them to be diverse and be themselves and take their own perspectives and show me those in their writing. By the end of last year, that's when I finally kind of figured things out, and I feel like I really had grown a lot as a teacher, and it kind of tied all these things from my experiences back to 6th grade together. The last project we did at the end of the year was a newsletter. There was less focus on grammar. I mainly evaluated the ideas. The grading was better for me overall. Their grades were better for them overall. They were more enjoyable to read, and I think students actually enjoyed doing these. They were kind of reflections on the whole year. And again, it was an instance where I saw that creativity and freedom with structure breed excellence because they had the structure of it's a newsletter. From there, they could kind of do whatever they wanted to. They could choose whatever pieces they wanted to reflect on and how they wanted to put it into a newsletter format. And they turned out great. I guess as I reflect on my own writing experiences, my teaching experiences, I'm still really working on freedom and creativity within my own curriculum in all of the assignments that I can possibly give them freedom and creativity. I'm trying to use my coaching method as they're working on their writing to make sure that I'm helping them as they go and not just grading their final papers and handing it back to them. I've coached both basketball and tennis. I'm currently working with my tennis guys, so I'll go that route with my final kind of thought on this. I'm really striving at this point for my teaching of writing to be like my coaching of tennis. I'm positive in the good and bad played moments, only harsh when the egos are the problem. I try to give my students the basic skills they have to be successful. Maybe pre-writing is like footwork. You have to have the footwork done before you can even move into the steps, or before you can move into the strokes. Drafting is the serve or return because you've got to be able to get something down, get the ball in play before you can even have a draft or a point of some kind. Revision is the point played out. So that's actually the meat of everything is the revision part. That's where the really good stuff happens sometimes. And the overhead smash, which is probably my favorite shot as kind of a tall guy who likes to play at the net, is an amazing conclusion that leaves the reader feeling something. I can work with them on the skills in the process, but no 2 points or papers will ever be the same. Footwork changes on every point. Sometimes you have to do things that make you uncomfortable to win a point. Sometimes if you're a baseline rally guy, you have to go up to the net. And unfortunately, if you want to win the point, you got to do it. And sometimes you lose points. Luckily, you get more chances if you stick with it. And luckily, you have the freedom and creativity to kind of make a point whatever you think it can be within the given opponent that you're playing or within the given assignment. And so that's kind of what I'm striving for. Those are my experiences as both a writer and as a teacher of writing, and that's kind of where I see myself heading into the future.